Okay, so in a previous video I made the melody for this, and I think I made the drums as well in another video, I can't remember. But in this video I'm going to be like arranging it, finishing the mixing process, which is like 90% done already, and then mastering it. So let's begin. So the first thing I'm going to do is save it, and then blow my nose because I have allergies. So I apologize if you hear me like coughing, sniffling, all that fun stuff. So let's split everything out. So for most of the beats that I arrange, as of lately, I've had like two sections. So two 16-bar sections like this. And then one will act as like the hook, and another will be a verse, and then there'll be a bridge, and then I'll repeat it. In this case, I have three different sections, which is a little bit different. So because of that, I'm going to take more things out in one of these sections than I normally would, and then we'll go from there. So once I've finished taking out some things from some different sections, I'll create a bridge, kind of like I did for the intro, and then I'll copy and paste it. So I'll still have two halves like I normally do, but like I said, in this case, I have like three sections instead of two. And then the drums will cut out, and then, or not the drums, I'm sorry, then the bass guitar, I think I want that to cut out for this section, and then maybe come in for the second half or something like that. Actually, no, we'll take it out completely. And then we'll take out the crash for this section as well. And then let's also take away one of the main snare sounds. And then, because this section plays twice, although it is louder over here, I might fade it out here and kind of let these drums get a little bit busy towards the end to take up some of that space. And then it comes back in. I think I like this middle section the way it is. It kind of starts off a little bit more tame, and then things slowly come back in, and then you go back into maybe another verse or something, or maybe a hook. So I like the idea of taking the second half of this third section, changing it slightly. Maybe since the main hi-hat here wasn't playing for this section, maybe I do the opposite and take out that like snare that's also kind of acting like a hat. Maybe we take that out here to make the hats come in a little bit late in this section, so they come in after the main snare. Okay, so the kick at the end of each of these sections I want to take away. Anything that's after the main snare or main clap, at the end of each of these 16-bar sections, I take away, so that you have a little bit of a moment, like a little bit of a transition moment where things are kind of fading in and out, which is part of the reason why I took out the hats at the beginning here. It gives you a little bit of like a special moment there where you don't have as much going on, just for that brief moment. Maybe I take away this, since I kind of only have that in the middle here. Yeah, that kind of fixed it. I think for the middle section here, I want it to like have a moment where like nothing is playing after right here. So I may take these two kick notes out as well. I'm not sure. Yeah, because it sounds weird. And that comes back in. Okay, so let's work on the beginning part. I basically just want everything that's not the original melody that I made, and I want things to like fade in and out. So let's start with fading this one in, and all of them are going to fade out at the very end because I'm going to put my tag right there at the end. And then maybe this snare starts right here. Okay, so let's copy and paste this over, and we'll make a bridge. Everything. Maybe I don't want the original. Maybe I'll just do the same thing I did for the intro. But what I'm going to do is put halftime on it. So, okay, so I pitched everything up an octave because it was just too low with the halftime on it. The halftime will pitch everything down an octave, so sometimes things get a little bit too low in frequency to sound good. So sometimes when I'm making a bridge, I will pitch some of the like elements up and down, you know, depending on where they are. And then we can also put halftime on some sections here if we want to. So maybe we can do a little It may not sound good, so I'm just going to try it. And then if it sounds bad, we'll take it out. Okay, that's kind of cool. I'm going to add my tags. So we basically have the beat mixed and arranged. I'm going to finish the mixing process if there is anything that needs to be changed as I master it. And then I'm going to send basically every sound that is here. So my melodies, my bass guitar, all of my drums, and then my tags. Probably don't have to do the tags, but it doesn't really matter. And I'm sending them all to one bus, and I'm going to call that my pre-master chain. There it is. And you could probably get away with mastering all in one step, like just on the master instead of splitting it into two like what I'm doing. But in the end, it doesn't really matter as long as it sounds good. So in my pre-master chain, I've got 3 instances of Maximus. I've got a couple of patcher presets, a wave shaper for a hard clipping, and we'll get to that, and then a limiter, as well as an EQ. And basically what I'm doing is using Maximus to do multiband compression, which just means I'm compressing specific frequencies at specific times. And then I'm also pushing things in the stereo field in and out, so mono versus separated and that sort of thing. So let's begin. So in all of these Maximus presets, I'm doing basically the same thing. The difference will be the band placement. So here are the bands on the first one. I've got 50 hertz and below for my low band, and then for my high band, it's about 10K and above. On the high bands for each of these Maximus instances, I am taking the highs and separating them by about 10% and doing the opposite with the lows. I'm merging them 10%, and you'll notice I'm doing that in small amounts as I go. You could probably get away with doing a lot of this all at once, like I said before, but I like to do things in small amounts incrementally. So yeah, doing the low and high bands, putting them in separated versus mono. And then I'm also, as I do each instance of Maximus, you'll notice that I'm compressing it more and more. So in this first one, this band is up here by the 9. Okay, this little dot, node, whatever you want to call it, is up by the 9. In the second instance, if you'll pay attention, it'll be closer to the 6. And then in the third, it'll be by the 3. And then I'll add another instance of Maximus later, and you'll notice that it's going to be flat. And what that means is, like, the flatter it is, the closer you are to limiting. So once you get flat, you're limiting. And then anything above, until you get to all the way here, you're doing varying levels of compression. So if you're by the 9, you're compressing a little bit. If you're down by the 6, you're compressing a little bit more aggressively. If you're by the 3, you're compressing a little bit more, and so on and so forth. The process. And then let's begin. So here's our low band, 50 hertz and below. And here. Okay, so one thing I'm looking for 50 hertz and below is I want to make sure I'm getting at least to this -9 or -8.7 is what it says. I want to make sure my 50 hertz and below information is getting at least to this point, and if it's not, I'm going to make it louder so that it does. So I'm not compressing at all, which means I'm not getting this loud. I'm pretty far off, actually. So what I'm going to do is push the volume until I get to that point. And then once I get to that point, I'm going to push just a little bit further, just to get a small amount of compression going, but not too much. And normally I would level match, but like I said before, right now I'm making the balance of the song the way that I want it, so I'm not level matching. But in basically every other band, I will be level matching. Something else I'm going to do is I'm going to make the loud stuff in this region louder by putting a band about as low as it can go without it being all the way down there, and then taking everything that's above that band and expanding it. So if you curve this up like this, you will expand anything that's from here to here, which means it'll just get a little bit louder. And you can see it's pulling the volume of that stuff up. And then I'm going to do the opposite with anything that is lower than this, because if we notice, there's some like information down here, and I don't know what that's from. We could probably go back and see exactly what it's from, but it doesn't really matter what it's from because I know that I don't want it there. Because anything in this 50 hertz and below, I really just want my kick and my bass guitar. If anything else is down in this 50 hertz and below range, it could cause some muddiness. It could get in the way, it could, whatever. I basically just don't want it there. So I'm going to do the opposites. Anything below this dot, I'm going to bring down. And you can see it's bringing the volume down after that initial like punch of the kick. Okay, let's go to the mid-band. Now remember, the mid-band in this case is basically the entire thing, so the amount of compression we're going to be doing is very minimal. In fact, we're already compressing a little bit, so I don't need to push too much more, but I will push a little bit. So I pushed up by 0.9 decibels, so I'm going to pull this down by 0.9. Let's go to the high band. I am usually fine with compressing this high band quite a bit more than everything else, and the reason for that is because I want my hi-hats to dominate that higher range. So if other things are taking up that high space, that high frequency space range, whatever you want to call it, I want to compress them down so that my hi-hats are shining through just a little bit more in that high region. Which is kind of similar to how, like in the middle region, I kind of want my clap or my snare to be the main thing that you're hearing or paying attention to. So in the middle range, I want my clap or my snare to be like the most prominent thing. And then in the low end, it's obviously like the kick, the bass guitar, that sort of thing. Okay, so I pushed this up by 5.5. So let's pull it back by 5.5. Let's go to the master. And I don't need to level match on the master because I'm not changing the balance of the song at all. So, all right, let's go to the second instance, and it's going to be basically the same thing. The difference will be obviously the band placement. So I brought the bands in. So instead of being down by the 50, I'm up by 175. Instead of being by the 10K, this one's down by the 5K. So I pushed this up by 1, so let's pull it back by 1 twice. Let's go to the mids. So I pushed up into this by 0.9, so let's pull it back by 0.9. Go to the highs. So I pushed up into this by 0.7, pull this back by 0.7. Go to the master. Okay, let's go to our third instance of Maximus. We're going to basically be doing the same thing. The difference is on the mid band, I'm going to solo it so that we can just hear this middle orange region here. And I'm going to pull this band up until I don't really hear that bass guitar or kick too much anymore. And then I'm going to pull this band up until I don't really hear the hats anymore. So let me put these back so that we can really hear what's happening. So I'm trying to get rid of that kick and that 808 or that bass guitar. And then we want to do the same thing with the high band, except pull it in until we don't really hear the hats anymore. Okay, now the process will be basically the same. So I pushed it up by 1, so I pulled it back by 1. Let's go to the mids. And something unique I'm going to do in the mids here is I'm going to take another dot or note or whatever you want to call it and put it up so that it basically anything above this orange line is only that main clap or that main snare. Sometimes I'll get, you know, a secondary snare in here or whatever, but I'm not too worried about that. And then I'm going to use the expansion function again to make this stuff kind of poke out just a little bit more. Go to the highs. And again, I'm okay with compressing the highs more because these are the hats right here. This is the snare, like the main snare or whatever. So I want to see if I can't get this to be a little bit higher up relative to this in this higher range. So I pushed it up by 4.9. Let's pull it back by 4.9. Okay, as a matter of fact, I'm going to go back into the mix. I'm going to go find the main snare, and I'm going to take off some of this high end so that I'm not having to compress quite as much, because that can kind of make the sound a little bit worse. Yeah, so you can see we're compressing quite a bit less now. We are still compressing, but not quite as much. All right, let's go to our patcher presets, or this patcher preset. This is for stereo, so I've got my lows, my highs, my mids, and then the stuff in between. And if you pull this down, you're going to put it in mono. If you push it up, you're going to put it in the separated field, so which is the opposite of how it is in FL, which is kind of confusing, but whatever. And then I've got a wave shaper, which has a hard clipper on it. And then sometimes I also take the quieter stuff and bring them up a little bit, but let me listen to it first. Okay, I've got a lot of like compressed sounds here, as well as some like reverby sounds. So I don't think I want to do this because I'll be affecting that reverb. So if I make it extreme, You hear all that noise and extra reverb that's really coming through now. So I don't want to do that in this case. What I might do is kind of similar. Just take the stuff that's in the middle here. So hopefully this is where those hats are sitting, and just kind of do that there. And something else I'm doing at this stage, like I said, this is hard clipping, and I'm pushing 5% extra volume up into the hard clipper. So the hard clipper is already chopping off some of the signal at the top, and then I'm pushing a little bit of extra volume into it to do that a little bit more. So I'll get there. So next thing I have is a patcher preset, which is a mid-side EQ. So I've got my sides. I'm cutting out the like sub frequencies on the sides. And then on just the mids, I've got another EQ, but before the EQ, I like to add a little bit of saturation, and then I have a limiter. So I end up limiting a little bit sometimes here if my stuff is a little bit louder. In this case, I'm not, it doesn't look like. But yeah, I'm adding saturation to that louder stuff that's coming in to the mid signal. And then on the mids, I'm cutting the low lows and the high highs. Okay, and since we shaved off a little bit of sound with this wave shaper there, since we shaved some of the sound off with the wave shaper, I'm going to go into a limiter, and I can actually push about 0.3 decibels up into this before any limiting happens. Okay, so that is my pre-master chain. Now we're going to go to the master chain. And again, you could probably get away with doing all of this in one, but I have it in two. Okay, so I've got another low cut, which is kind of redundant at this point, but I have a limiter and two compressors. This compressor is almost all the way mixed out and turned off, and the reason for that is because if we look at the settings, they're a bit ridiculous. I've got a 0 attack and a slower release with a 3:1 ratio, and then the threshold's being brought down by 30 and the gain's being brought up by about 20. So if this was mixed all the way on, this is what it would sound like, and it's going to be really loud, by the way, so just be ready. Okay, that's what way too much compression sounds like. It's like pulling sound up and down, up. It's like a whooshing sound, woof, 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 every time something comes in, which is not what you want. So I mix this signal almost all the way back. It's usually 5 to 10%, because I've found that if you mix just a tiny amount of that over-compressed signal in, it can just kind of make everything sound a little bit louder, a little bit beefier. You know, and then this compressor is a bit more normal, where the threshold's only being brought down by about 10. The attack is slower instead of 0. Instead of being fast, it's slower attack, faster release, about the same ratio, and then I'm pushing a little bit of gain up, just a couple decibels. And this one, sometimes I have all the way on, sometimes I have it halfway mixed in. It really depends on the track. So let's start with it all the way on and see what it sounds like. And then later on, when I look at my loudness meter, if I'm not quite loud enough, I'll mix this all the way on, and then I'll push a little bit of gain into it a little bit later. But for now, I'm going to leave it mixed out a little bit. Let's go to our last instance of Maximus, and I'm going to treat this one the same way I treated the third instance of Maximus in the pre-master chain. So I'm going to go to the mid-band, solo it, and then I'm going to move the bands so that I don't really hear the kick or the bass guitar, and I don't really hear the hats. And then the process will be basically the same. Okay, so I pushed up 0.7, so let's pull this back by 0.7. Let's pull it down by 0.4. And sometimes at this stage I do expansion again to the like louder stuff like that. Yeah, so like I said, sometimes I do expansion at this point, sometimes I don't in this higher range. Okay, so I brought this down by 1.4, so let's bring this up by 1.4. Okay, the next patcher preset is the same thing that we saw before with the stereo. I'm just doing it a little bit more. And then I have a limiter and a soft clipper. So we're going to use the limiter to kind of visually tell us what we think we can push into it. And then we're going to put the limiter after the soft clipper and then push volume into the soft clipper to see if we can't make everything just a little bit louder. Okay, so I bet we can go down about this far. So what I'm looking for are like the next loudest things. So if you notice, I wish I could zoom in more so it's easier to see what I'm talking about. But there are like everything up top here is the loud stuff, obviously. But if we look like down next to the loud stuff, there are these little sections, little pockets of sound that are just a little bit quieter than the loudest stuff here. So it's not quite as loud, although this stuff does get a little bit louder. But yeah, so there's a little bit of information here that's a little bit quieter. Here, it's a little bit quieter. So I'm looking for places where I could push the volume up so that those things are as loud as the loudest things. I don't know if any of what I just said makes any kind of sense, but hopefully it did. So I have this pulled down by 1.1, so let's put it back. And then I'm going to push 1.1 decibels into the soft clipper, okay? So I put the limiter after the soft clipper. So I'm going to push 1.1 decibels of sound. So I pushed 1.1 decibels of sound, then it goes through the patcher preset, which doesn't matter because it's not changing the volume. So pushed 1.1 decibels, then it goes into the soft clipper, it gets soft clipped, and then we're going to see it here. Okay, let's save it, and then I'm going to pull up the Ulean loudness meter and use it to kind of tell me how loud my track is. If you notice that I'm using this tool incorrectly, please let me know in the comments. I'm kind of new to using it, relatively new to using it. Or if you see a way that I can improve with using this tool, feel free to let me know. But I'm basically looking at 2 or 3 things. I'm looking at this integrated LUFS and the short-term LUFS sometimes. And then I'm looking at my true peak max, and I'm trying to make sure that this doesn't go above 0. And then I like to make sure that my track is loud enough overall. So for this number, I'm kind of looking for something in the -8 point somethings, -9 point somethings, somewhere in there. And then I'll also be glancing at this just to kind of tell me how loud specific sections of a track are. But yeah. We got up to 0 here. So I am going to reduce the volume a little bit just to make sure I'm not. But it looks like I'm about where I want to be with the loudness. I could probably push a little bit of volume into that. Okay, so we got up to 0. So I'm going to come back over here. And I'm going to reduce the volume by 0.1 decibels. And then I'm going to push, like I said I was going to do, I'm going to mix this all the way on now. And then I'm going to come over here to Maximus, and I'm going to push like 0.2 decibels. We'll just see how loud we get. And then I'm going to play it again. Okay, so I think we are where we want to be. I never got up to 0, so I'm good with that. And this stayed around the range I wanted it to be in. And this is quieter now because it was playing the quieter section there at the end, but that was looking about where I wanted it. So let's turn that off. Let's save it, and then we're ready to export it. So if you have any questions about any part of this process, feel free to let me know in the comments. Also, like I said, if you see something I can improve on, or like if you know how to use a tool like this one, for example, that I'm not using entirely correctly, or maybe I can just learn something about it that I don't know, feel free to throw that in the comments as well. But yeah, let's let the beat ride for a second, and that'll be it for the video.